Don't ruin your agency by making these top 3 mistakes that staffing firm owners make in the early stages of launching their business. On this channel, we help healthcare entrepreneurs start, grow, and sell their companies. Welcome to Passive Workforce. The first mistake that I see founders make is a not so obvious one as it's happening. That mistake is focusing on looking like a business rather than focusing on the most important aspects of the business. Because we consult companies that are just getting started out, there's something that I see amongst a lot of founders, and that's to focus on all these little details that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things when you're launching a business. What they focus on are the details of their website, the details of their business card and brochures, all of this public-facing stuff that really doesn't matter. They think about the name too much. All these details are almost like stall tactics or things that the public really don't care about. If you were starting a computer company, do you really think that you would choose the name Apple to represent your computer company and that the brand behind the name would be super strong? It has nothing to do with computers. It has nothing to do with how the public is going to perceive you. What makes your brand strong and what makes your company liked and people want to work with it is what you actually do in the day-to-day, the product and services that you provide. And people get so caught up in the imagery and they compare themselves to late-stage companies who've had a lot of time to redesign their brand, work on their website, work on the visuals. That has nothing to do with the business. The core of the business is matching employees with facilities that are short-staffed. That's it. The more you focus on that, making sure that there's a good match between the worker and the facility and the fact that you're going out there and building these bridges, building these connections, those are the things that are going to separate you from being successful and not successful. I don't care how cool your name is, how pretty your logo is, none of that matters. What matters is that you're able to go out there, convince a facility that you are the best agency that they should be working with, convince the public that you are also the best agency that they should be working with, and connect the two. None of them are going to care about how your logo looks. If your website is a little shoddy, just say, hey, that's not something that we really focus on at our company. What we really focus on is the matchmaking that we do here in the organization. We really want nurses to have positive experiences where they work. We really want our facilities to look at our agency as the most responsible, the most consistent, etc. The rest will fill in, because if you want to then go back and redesign your website, you could do that a million times and it's going to cost you money, but it's never going to bring you in more money than before. Look at Amazon's website. The largest e-commerce platform in the world. It's not that fabulously designed, and it has looked like trash for years. Amazon is not the prettiest website. You compare that to like a new fashion designer's website that has a lot of bells and whistles, well stylized, super pretty. Then you're doing no sales. What's the difference? Amazon focused on the core of their business, focused on the customer experience. How do we get products to them quickly? How do we get them to the customer as presented? How do we give the customer good feedback in the form of reviews so that they know that what they're buying is worth the money? These are the things that you need to focus on when forming your business, and not all that vanity stuff. Number 2 on my list is maintaining bad employee records. Personnel records are a big part of healthcare compliance. If you are a licensed organization, home care agency, skilled nursing facility, ALF, hospital, you have to function under clear regulations issued by your state Department of Health. And one of those sections of the regulations has to do with personnel records. These are all the employees that are working in the facility. Every employee has a standard file that should be maintained by the employer. And it's going to consist of a whole lot of things. And some of the things that it's going to consist of are their identification. Are they legal to work in the United States? Do they have a passport, driver's license, birth certificate, work authorization card? Those details matter because that's something that's required of the Department of Labor. Another thing the personnel records need to have and need to be up to date with are their medical files. If you've worked in healthcare, especially if you're a nurse, you're going to be able to identify with this. Every single year, we got to get our physicals done, right? And that physical is going to prove that we're healthy. We don't have active tuberculosis. We either have to have the PPD skin test or a chest X-ray if we're positive, or just even a questionnaire. Really depends on what your TB status is. You're going to have to do blood draws to make sure that you're still immune to your MMR, your varicella vaccines. These are all things that we have to go through on an annual basis. And if you've worked in a facility, you know that when your annual is due, human resources is calling you down, sending you to employee health, or your manager is doing that, because every single year you have to have a fresh physical. You can't let it expire. If it's expired, you have to get pulled from the job. Why? Because they don't want you as the employee bringing diseases into the facility where people are being treated or are immunocompromised. So these are the things that the government is concerned with. Another thing is the record keeping of your certificates and licenses. Is this person actually registered and eligible to work in the position that they're hired for? This is going to be your nursing license, your CNA certificates, your registries, these sort of documents that prove this person is qualified to do this work and is still competent. That needs to be maintained as well. And these rules are clearly spelled out. So as the agency, how does that affect you? As the agency, it's your responsibility to maintain these records as well, because the facility is counting on you to send them capable, competent staff that meet the state regulations. And depending on how well the facility that you're staffing in is organized, they're gonna usually hold the agency to a high standard as to what sort of documentation they need to provide. But oftentimes the facilities aren't well-versed in working with agencies. And after you send them personnel, there is no follow-up. That person could be working in a facility for 2-3 years, didn't have their physical renewed, their driver's license has expired, their temporary work permit, because they were a resident of the United States through immigration or something like that, has expired. And they have no idea. And what happens is the accreditation bodies or the state, when they do their surveys of the facilities to ensure that they're following the guidelines, they'll ask for personnel records and review them against the guidelines. So imagine what happens when the nurse that you sent that's been working there for a few months or a few years with expired documents or even no documents at all is discovered to be on the floor by one of these surveyors. It's a disaster. You don't want to fall into that. So one of the things that I recommend that you do is just maintain clear communication with the Department of Health, so you know exactly what's expected of personnel records for the facility types that you're staffing, and also maintain communication with the facilities that you staff so that you can organize a system, whether it's using our software, On Time ITS, to track those sort of documents, or using your own series of spreadsheets where you're at least tracking the dates for all these documents that expire so that you maintain compliance of personnel records. If you find this information useful, make sure that you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing. If you're just starting your agency, make sure that you visit us at passiveworkforce.com to get more information on how to start an agency or on how to work with our firm to get you up and running. The third and probably biggest mistake that I see agencies make is choosing to employ workers as 1099 contractors rather than as W-2 employees. Now, this is something that I'm a huge advocate for. 1099 is not an employee class that you should be hiring in your agency. And what I find is that when founders choose to go with 1099, it's usually for two reasons. They're trying to reduce cost, and they also think that it's easier because they're not having to deal with any tax withholdings. And whoever is teaching you guys this, that 1099 is a good option, is dishonest and lying to you. And I'll explain to you why that's the case. As a 1099 contractor, you're not technically an employee. You're negotiating a fixed rate for a fixed service as an independent contractor. And even though that these nurses and healthcare professionals are working as contractors working on contracts, they are actually the employee of the agency. The agency tells them where to go. The agency tells them what shift. The agency is responsible for their weekly payroll. All of these things are things that disqualify someone as being a contractor. Now, why do people recommend 1099? Well, first of all, as an employer, if this is your first time hearing this, employers have to pay payroll taxes on their employees too. Just like you get deductions out of your paycheck, we as employers have to do a certain amount of matching of taxes to employ you. That comes out to around 11 to 13% depending on what city and state that you're in. So that's a lot of money for an agency owner to have to part with. So that's one reason why they go with 1099. They think, okay, well, I don't have to pay that. Another reason they go with 1099 is to avoid workers' compensation insurance. What do I mean by that? Workers' compensation is something that has to be paid on all employees, especially if you're in a mandatory workers' compensation state. Workers' comp insurance is there to protect the employee so that if they get hurt on the job, they get healthcare services and some income while they're recovering, rather than just being out. So imagine if somebody's a contractor and gets hurt working in a facility and they were working for you and you have no workers' compensation insurance. Who's going to get sued? You are going to get sued and a facility is going to get sued because that person's hurt and out of work. Bad thing. But workers' compensation can cost anywhere between 3 and like 15% depending on what state you're in. So again, that's a big chunk of money that has to be paid out and it takes away from the profits. So what agencies are thinking is that, hey, if I can avoid paying taxes and workers' comp, that saves me like 20% a year. That's 20% more money in my pocket. I could charge lower rates so that I could undercut my competitors and get all the business. But in the meantime, you're actually out of compliance with the Department of Labor, and you're really opening yourself up to a lot of litigation and a lot of lawsuits. And the proof behind that is what happens when you try to sell your company, right? We acquire companies both in home healthcare and healthcare staffing. And one thing that is an automatic disqualifier is if an organization is a 1099 shop, that everybody's employed as independent contractors. Why? Because the employee class that they were just hiring, they're going to be entitled to bring up any sort of lawsuit going forward. So if there was unpaid overtime, unpaid PTO, or PTO that should have been issued but wasn't, by PTO I mean paid time off, wasn't issued because they were contractors, taxes weren't withheld or paid on their behalf, and now they have an excessive tax bill. If those employees come together and file a class action lawsuit, they're going to win. And not only are they going to win, you're going to have to pay back the money, you're going to have to pay into the pool that you're specified to pay into, you're going to get fined, you're going to have a ton of lawyer fees, and usually when you take those sort of lawsuits to trial, the fines get doubled and tripled. So it's going to cost you way more. So any competent buyer is going to say, I'm not exposing myself to that risk. You have millions of dollars of payroll that you didn't pay workers' compensation on. You have $1 million of payroll you didn't pay taxes on. I'm going to buy that and inherit that liability? Absolutely not. So for anybody out there who's running their agency as a 1099 shop and says, well, my other agencies do it, all you need to do is look to the top agencies in the country, the big players, and none of them, not one of them, are going to hire people as 1099s. And that's going to be the indicator that they're doing things the right way. The agencies that are paying as 1099, they're just flying under the radar. Their day will come. You don't want to be that agency. Hopefully you take my advice and avoid these top 3 mistakes that you can make as an agency. If you don't believe how bad it could get, make sure that you watch this video right here where I go over a horror story that shows you how an agency got themselves shut down by not following these steps.